attended the 4Cs that sometimes our energy just dissipates. You go to a final session, you head to the bar, to the pool, and there's no chance of sort of collecting our thoughts. And so one thing I wanted to do was collect our thoughts, but rather than just kind of open-ended collection, I wanted to focus on a document that we wrote under Malea Powell's chairship, which is the 2022 Vision Governance Statement. And that has guided subsequent executive committees in how we spend money, how we choose conference locations, how we organize our efforts. So it's a very important document, and you may or may not be aware of it, but I wanted to put that up on the big screen, and I wanted to have that a focal point for this final discussion about where do we go? What is the 4Cs? What is our future? Where should we place our efforts and our energies? And I think the mics are out and active. We're going to sort of bounce and brainstorm off of it and talk about how this document, where it came from and how it guides us, but really find out from you. I mean, is this where we want the 4Cs to go? This is more outward looking. You can look at it for yourself. You might say, you know, we shouldn't be in the lobbying or outward looking business. We should be turning inward and making better teachers and better scholarship. And it'd be a good argument to make. Times being what they are, and looking at this program in Tampa, I would say that a lot of you and a lot of our faculty are interested in an outward turn and advocating for literacy and advocating for ourselves and our organization and our discipline beyond the scope of just us. But that's a debatable point, and that's one thing that we put out there with this vision statement. And so that's going to be sort of the organizational principle of this dialogue, is to bounce off of that statement. Thank you so much for coming. I'm joined on stage with Howard Tinberg, to my far right, the immediate past chair of the 4Cs. And you might not know this, but the chair rotation is 4 people. There's the assistant chair, newly elected Linda Adler-Kassner, who puts together the call for proposals for the next year. Then the associate chair, who is me, who runs the program. Then there's the chair, Adam Banks, who is not here, but he'll be walking in shortly. They bang the gavel and write the memos and do the hard bureaucratic work. And then you rotate off and you're the immediate past chair, and you have the wisdom and knowledge to help guide the newbies with their business. When Malea were joined with Malea Powell, who was chair at the time that we crafted this vision statement. So I thought it would be a good mix to have the current officers rotation as well as the writer, basically, of this document together to talk about it. So why don't we kick things off, Malea?
I'm trying to make sure. Can you guys hear me? Okay. All right. Yay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about how this statement came to be, and part of this has to do with I sat on the EC from 2004 to 2007, but while we were learning how to do strategic governance, but before we had a vision. So the way that strategic governance works is you have a vision statement for a limited amount of time, 5 years, 10 years, that articulates with an organization's mission statement. And then all of the strategic moves that an organization makes in that 5 or 10 years are aimed at accomplishing that vision. Vision statements are supposed to be big and aspirational, almost impossible to accomplish, in order to guide strategic governance. They're also supposed to be capacious. And so, I had sat on the EC where we had strategic governance, but no vision. And in talking to Kent Williamson, found out that we'd never had a vision statement for this organization. We've only ever articulated to our mission, which is even a bigger kind of capacious, ambiguous statement. So in 2011, at the fall retreat at the NCTE, the executive committee did a retreat where we asked EC members basically to brainstorm a series of things that if we were going to write a big audacious goal statement, what it would look like. And we collected, I don't know, 50 or 60, big tear-off notepad pages. I wrote them all out, gathered them together, so that the EC and the officers in 2012, when we did our retreat here in Clearwater Beach, sat down with everything that they had told us, and we started writing sentences together. And so this was a process that first engaged the EC, then came to the officers. In March of 2012, we took those sentences back to the EC, and as you might imagine, when you put anything in front of the executive committee, we had a lot of feedback. Some of which was copy editing oriented, and so we said we're not taking copy edits until we're ready for this to be real. And so we had a long session during our EC meeting where we took feedback, and then I took electronic feedback as well, oriented it back into the document in some semblance of sense, and passed that back and forth as officers for the next few months until our meeting in November of 2012, when we presented a draft to the executive committee and they unanimously passed this as the 4Cs vision. I'm leaving out all the good bits, but so that's how it came to be. It was a long process. There was a lot of interaction and a lot of feedback, and we really felt like these were the outward-looking goals that we wanted this organization to take up as its vision for the next 10 years.
So Howard, is one of the first inheritors of this vision statement, how, and having done a conference and having chaired and now sitting reflecting on what we've done.
Comfortably.
What is the role of, how did this work with you and your choices as chair and as program chair?
First of all, I have to admit that I'm going to have to leave in about 20, 25 minutes to catch a shuttle. I apologize ahead of time. I recall vividly attending that retreat, and there was a part of me when that phrase vision statement was used that kind of resisted, because I've heard plenty of that stuff as strategic planning efforts at my college. But I began to think more and more about the implications of this statement and the implications of that public turn, that outward turn. And listen, I've taught almost 3 decades at a public community college, and I know firsthand that we in higher ed are not immune to the concerns and pressures that are put upon us by legislators, by the federal government, a whole bunch of other folks. So it struck me that it was time for us as an organization to really sort of think of ourselves not only as really good researchers and scholars and teachers, but to be advocates as well on public issues that affect our students and affect higher ed and perhaps K through 12 too. Because indeed, we are not immune from those pressures that are facing our colleagues in the K through 12 system. As we've learned in Massachusetts, where I teach, Park is here, and the Common Core certainly is here, and we are being impacted by it. Indeed, Park may be used as a placement mechanism. This is a standardized test to determine whether students have met the Common Core. That may be a placement mechanism for students as they're put into English 101 or basic writing. So I thought more and more about the kind of public turn implied and the clear, trusted public voice that was stated in our vision statement. And in my call for papers, proclaimed the public work of composition. I recall Henry Drew coming to the conference. He was a featured speaker and saying, "You've got, essentially to all of us, you've got a lot of guts to talk about the public work of composition when the public is so often derided in public unions as well." But it's clearly we have a stake in this effort to be the better advocate. It isn't an either-or thing. We can continue to do the research that we need to do, and we can continue to do the excellent teaching and the service in our own communities and colleges. But at the same time, we need to find a way to communicate the best of that research and to advocate for those positions. So I was very pleased that Joyce took up the challenge as well, and that Linda also, in sort of bringing community organization, activism into 2016, that we're really being true to the vision. Just one other thing about the strategic planning. I also learned very quickly that the organization has done some really good thinking about how to engage initiatives and how to promote initiatives. Kent Williamson is just a wonderful strategic planner and very wise person. Suggested that first we need to sort of look at what we're currently doing well and what resources we have to bear on what we do well. But then we need to kind of look at what needs to be done that we're not doing right now, in line with the vision statement. And very importantly, what resources are required in order to promote certain initiatives. And so it's not, we can't really jump from one initiative to another. We need to think strategically in the best sense of that word And I think the vision statement helped ground us in that way.
Let me ask a question here so that it can bounce off of Howard since he has to leave a little earlier, then we'll take up the second half. Looking at the vision statement, one of the things that's most challenging, and I appreciate you saying that maybe they're unattainable goals.
Yeah.
A lot of that is very attainable. The stuff that strikes me as really difficult, leading voice in public discussions. When I picture that, I picture Fox News talking heads or NPR commentators. I think of something that's really difficult, beyond our resources. We don't have enough resources to have our own TV station and would have to buy public service announcements. So the question is we've got to partner, it seems to me, to make those connections.
Yes.
And leading trusted voice, 99.999% of parents, educators, legislators don't even know our acronym. So I don't know how that leading trusted public voice, how that happens. But that's part of that question. There's the goal. What steps would we have to take to do that?
Yeah.
And I don't think we have misstepped at all. I just think they're awfully big steps, and they're further than a 10-year vision, it seems to me.
I think that's absolutely true. I mean, we decided to do this. We were about 2 years later than the NCTE's 2020 vision statement, which is equally audacious, right, and ambitious. But we also know that the NCTE already has some partners, right? And so the idea was that we would bring the 4Cs issues, fold them into some of those partnerships in a more substantial and sustainable way. But yeah, no, as we were writing this, I mean, you were on the EC when we were writing this, right? There were these moments where we all looked up and laughed and we're like, really? We're gonna say this? And I was, I have to say I'm an instigator. I'm like, let's say it. Let's lead. Let's try. If we get halfway to some of these big audacious goals, we've made this huge step for ourselves and for our students and for our constituents.
Go ahead.
I think this vision statement is incredibly valuable as a guiding document, incredibly valuable. And one of the things that I think is really important for all of us to remember, something that we've said fairly frequently at this conference, is that, it's a clear, trusted voice, but the important thing is that we are 4Cs. All of us in this room are 4Cs.
Yes.
So it's not, we don't have to think of people turning to 4Cs as an organization, We, all of us, need to become that clear, public, trusted voice.
Yes.
Advocating for writers, for writing education and for literacy education. And I think I think in that sense, that work of, the work of working from the ground up is, it is the long revolution, right? I mean, that's, as Raymond Williams told us, but it's long and it's us. And so as long as we continue to walk that road, we're working toward that 2020 vision statement in a way that I think you framers did a lovely job setting out for us.
I might add also that in order to be successful in turning outward, we have to continue to turn inward and become transparent in our activities to our members. And we need to be explicit and direct about why we do things that we do as leaders, as EC members. Transparency is crucial, and I think, Joyce, you've made great strides in sort of demystifying the process for how we come to convention, how peer review operates, how the review process goes forward. We've heard over the years members say, who are these committees? How do I join? How does the office rotation work? I think this organization is going to make a more committed effort to build on what you've done, Joyce, and to kind of lay open the process. Being a leading public voice in matters of literacy, it seems to me, cannot work unless our membership is really there and ready to do the work. And that means they have to trust this organization. They have to feel they're engaged, and that the channels for access are clear. So new folks who are coming into the profession and are really interested in wanting to be engaged, need to find out very quickly how to do that. What does engagement look like? It's not just a matter anymore of just paying your registration and expecting your journals. No, membership is going to be redefined in interesting ways, but critical for that is, again, that element of transparency and that ease of access and engagement.
Well, to harken back to Kent Williamson, who is our executive director emeritus. Something he said that really struck me about this. He said, you know, you join the 4 Cs not for what you get, but what you get to do. And I love that turn from joining to get a journal or to get registration to a conference, but to get access to the capacity that we have as an organization. And Howard's exactly right. I think possibly, and it struck me when you were talking, that the clear, trusted public voice might not be a public service announcement or a TV show, but it might be enabling all the members in media training or in press releases, or it might be a completely distributed model. It might be a totally different vision from when we wrote this, and I did chuckle when we wrote it. I thought, we can't say this. We don't have the ability to do this. But I was imagining that single message, a book or a TV show, when it turns out that, yeah, maybe it's enacting everyone's capacity for change.
I agree with you. I mean, I think Joyce is correct. It is capacity building for all of us. And I think, as Howard said, so some of that we'll be really working on. We've worked on it at this conference. We'll continue to work on it in 2016. Some of it is, as Howard indicated, you know, developing these strategies for action. And some of it is really continuing to do the work that we do here at the conference and, you know, identifying our disciplinary knowledge, our research-based knowledge, and being able to take that and articulate it outward. I mean, we know some things, and the things we know are really valuable for folks. I mean, you know, as I always say, you know, writing is everybody's business. It's what we study. It pervades the activities of all kinds of things. So, you know, we have something to say to people. And saying that comes from all of us. And the more we can all say those things and work with others to build alliances so that we're doing it together, the stronger we are as an organization and as a bunch of people who are really committed to and passionate about the work of literacy education.
Yeah, and not just for 1 week a year.
No.
The idea of a conference being a convention is fine, but a conference, meaning a meeting of minds who work together year-round, is a concept that we, I think, want to foster as the 4 Cs.
A critical example of that, and within NCT, is a network of policy analysts, state by state. All the 50 states now have NCT members, both K through 12 and through higher ed, reporting on events happening in state legislatures affecting K through graduate school. And that, I think, it kind of concretizes the kind of engagement we're talking about. That plus the fact that we now have a C's policy fellow who will advocate for us in a sort of public legislative domain. So we're ready to roll here. But again, the strength of C's has always been as kind of grassroots energy. The committees, the caucuses, the task forces. It may seem kind of messy at times, but that's where the energy is coming from. It's astonishing from the view of the executive committee and officers how much good work is being done. I think in those committees, the most clear example or product or consequence of that work, of course, are the many really thoughtful position statements that are being put out there. And by the way, speaking of position statements, there's now in place a process of review and update of all those statements. And I'm also pleased to announce that elements of information about class size, cap size, enrollment limits for instruction in composition and rhetoric at the undergraduate level will be restored. Language will be restored in a key document about best practices, so that indeed you can go to your dean and go to colleagues and say, you know, C speaks with authoritative voice on this once again, that comp classes should not have more than 20 and basic writing classes not more than 15. That language is back, and I'm very pleased that it is.
Any thoughts from the audience? We can move on with other thoughts from ourselves. Here you go, Chuck. Here, use the mic because Chalice is bringing the mic up.
The gentleman in the 4th row.
But I can carry, I think.
Yeah, but it wouldn't be on video.
Well, okay. Just following up on some of the comments and on the organization of this. The desire to be the trusted public voice not only depends on the last few sentences, but actually is so far, if we looked at the kinds of things that have made sort of general public attention, some degree, they've been instantiations of the last three sentences. So, like the engagement in the adjunct controversies, right? And that's where some of us have emerged as spokesmen. When you think about the range of scholarship, I'm thinking of like Les's work with automated testing. That gets on media and makes our profession known. The one story that appeared in Inside Higher Education from this conference is about diversity, right? About yesterday's story. So rather than think about how do we frame the big public message, how do we support the things that the organization does and then make them public?
Excellent.
Can I speak to that?
I want to make sure Howard gets this before he has to leave.
It's so interesting, Les, that you chose that particular example, because that NCT produced that document on robograding, which was immediately taken up by some of the public media outlets. And Les's work in challenging robograding has been really instrumental. So I agree. We have to have content. It's not just a matter of committing to some public advocacy. We have to have something to advocate, and that is sort of rooted in our best work. But Les is an example of a colleague who is so thoroughly committed to the work and is able to translate the research in a way that is so clearly understood by those who have stake in this matter. So there's precedent, and I think we should continue to move forward, but also requires that we move quickly when these things happen. So I guess in some ways the pace of our work is going to be hastened. But we still have to be thoughtful. We have to be well-grounded in the data that we put together.
Capacity building to be able to take on those public roles. So that's what it was suggesting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that I didn't know when I knew some things about the 4Cs as a sort of advocacy group and the NCT as an advocacy group when I sat on the EC before. But one of the things that I really didn't know when I stepped into the chairship was the degree to which the NCTE had mobilized to sort of like engage and I'm going to use this word and I'm so sorry, and sort of capacitize, right, its membership at large. And so one of the first things I did was, the public policy training, that kind of stuff. But and I think that most members don't know that there's a big organizational engine that for a long time the Cs had a really hard time connecting with. And so that connection, I see like Jessie's nodding, like was on the EC that wrote this document too. That connection was important to us in order to leverage those ideas, in order to leverage that scholarship out into a public arena where it could be seen and attached to who we are. And so, I mean, I think that that's a part of it, is that suddenly we have an opportunity and a mechanism for being part of that big organizational advocacy engine, and we have to build our capacities as members. We have to think outwardly. It's great for us to talk about what great things we do, but we need to be the people to stand up and say, here's how you make a diverse graduate cohort. Here's how you make meaningful interactions with students who come from all kinds of writing situations that don't look anything like they look in the U.S. Here's how you engage with refugee communities. Here's how you engage with immigrant communities that have been invisible, right? We're the people that know how to say that. And I think that means each member has to be willing to understand their research as contributing to our ability, as Kent would say, to make statements in the public.
Leonard, did you want to?
But in order to do that appropriately and fully, we need to make certain that all voices are heard. No matter the institution, public or private. As someone from a public two-year college, I mean, it's important for me that other folks who work at community colleges, public and private, have a seat at the table and whose challenges are heard throughout the organization. So we have to be whole in that way in order for our public role to be credible. We can't necessarily assume that any of us could speak for one element of higher ed within composition rhetoric.
Hi, yeah, I'm Graham Harper. I'm Dean of the Honours College at Oakland University in Michigan. I want to just raise something with you, which is a public role that I think you embraced and yet not fully embraced. And that is the people that are involved in this organisation are some of the leading scholars in terms of creative writing research and creative writing pedagogy research. Now, I was formerly the chair of the higher education group at the National Association of Writers in Education in Britain. And around the world, creative writing research has quite literally gone further than it has done in the United States in most cases, except within this organisation where there are scholars and researchers who have done a lot of work in the field. This is the organisation that can do work in that area. This is the organisation I feel that can take a much more public role in promoting creative writing research and creative writing pedagogic research. At the moment, and I know it's an organisational debate, but at the moment that's not happening. I think it should. I think you've already established that as a role within 4Cs, and I would really recommend, and this is from an international perspective, that the 4Cs take a lead in that.
Thank you.
Michael Jeter. First of all, this is my first conference. It's an incredibly emotional time for me, and it's a wonderful thing to be here. And I just want to thank everyone for what has been an incredible experience. Joyce set up what I'm going to call a false dichotomy, and I know you were just raising a rhetorical argument of, do we want to create better teachers or be outwardly? That's easily a both and. Now, I would argue that there's no way we can create better teachers if we're not also creating teachers who are outwardly moving. Our work at its best is small d democratic and large I inclusionary, regardless of political philosophies. Our opponents, and they are many, are outwardly mobile. They can create their arguments in pithy little sound bites that get all the notice. I'm sure we do need to be able to marshal our best research to prove our points, but we also need to do a job of saying, this is who we are, this is what we do, and this is why you need us.
Excellent point. You're exactly right. I meant do one exclusively or with the other exclusively, but it was a rhetorical move. You're exactly right. We can't be good teachers and researchers if we don't understand the society in which we live, and we don't engage those issues. And we can't engage those issues as scholars and teachers if we're not studying and researching and doing scholarship. I think they go hand in hand. Thanks, Howard.
Thanks. This discussion just sparked an idea, and I apologize if it's, like many of my ideas, someone else probably came up with it first. I'm a little late to the party. But I think somebody mentioned Medium, and for anyone who's not familiar with Medium, it's kind of like Twitter for essays. Like it's a longer form kind of means of publishing essays and sharing them. And as far as I can tell, NCT nor Cs are in this writing space where a bunch of other people are writing. And so I just want to kind of put that on the radar. And also maybe suggest, like, I wonder if this is a venue for maybe taking some of our position statements and revising them so that they're essays written for a broader audience, for people who aren't in this room or don't know about Cs, and kind of make what our positions accessible to public audiences in a format that can be easily shared with a link, easily read. It actually keeps statistics of who's viewing it and who's liking it and recommending it. And so it might be a really interesting way to kind of to have that voice And just as an afterthought, like even if some of these essays invited voices from other places, other institutions, and then it was peer reviewed in some way so that folks could get their points for actually publishing in this venue, it's just an idea. I don't know. I'd love to hear what you think.
Tom, what's the site called?
It's medium.com.
Yeah.
And it's like Twitter for essays. And there's a lot of people writing there, but this is the other thing that's interesting. Like, there's a lot of writing spaces out there where people are writing, and we don't know about it, and we're the writing people. So I think we just got to get there, first of all. But then, like, think about how we could use that to accomplish some of this vision.
And what university are you at?
My name is Tom Sir. I'm at West Virginia University.
All right. Y'all sometimes ask how you can get involved. Tom just got involved.
That leads me to my second question, which is, what advice do you have for someone who is pre-tenure who would love to be involved and advocate?
I mean, what we traditionally say is let us know. There's a member survey that goes out once or twice a year to say, are you interested in being involved? What areas would you like to be involved in? What things are you interested in learning about? And you all fill those out, and I'm sure you think they just go into some crazy black hole and no one ever looks at them. That's not true. The chair gets a list of all of those every year, and when we're putting together various subcommittees and task force and action groups, we use those names. And so fill them out, encourage your colleagues to fill them out.
And you also can email people you know
You can.
on the executive committee and say, hey, I have this good idea, Linda. Why don't let me tell it to you. So do that, Tom.
But to speak to the other question, Tom, about medium.com or anything, I think the idea, it's a great idea to write and to advocate where the writing and advocacy is taking place. We had I don't know where we are on this, but we had a project to go in and populate Wikipedia with information about the 4 Cs, to go into medium.com or Twitter or wherever. And don't just talk to ourselves using the medium in which we're familiar, but to go where. So that means Spotify, Vine, Tumblr. It means doing our work there rather than being insulated. I think it's a great point, not just about general advocacy, but about foundational documents and about questions about what we want to do. It could maybe not crowdsource necessarily, but I sometimes think that having official channels, that officialness sometimes impedes grassroots participation. And I think it'd be well worth exploring ways of opening up those channels in the way you're talking about. It's a terrific suggestion. It's part of transparency, not just telling you who we are as being transparent, but opening up channels of participation, make them much more easy to participate.
And I think that both Joyce and Malea are raising a critical point that kind of speaks to the point that you raised, and that is that we are a discipline that has disciplinary knowledge, but it grows from the inside out. And so the directions that we take and the interests that we cultivate are the interests that are critical to us as members of this organization, and our interests are necessarily, because of what we are and who we do, driven by our experience with students, our experience with folks in the public, our experience with people in professions, because we work with writing, and writing is everywhere, right? When you study composed knowledge as we do, well, composed knowledge is everywhere. And so what we are and the shape that we take as a discipline is driven by us. So, you know, the vision statement invites us and provides us a way to really think about how to sort of shape that, but shape it as we go, not shape it and leave it in place as an inert object.
Yeah, and I mean, I really want to reemphasize what Linda said earlier, and that is you can email members of the EC, you can email anyone in the chair's rotation, a past chair that you know, to be able to like find a pipeline that you feel comfortable with. We're pretty accessible. We're really accessible. And we want to hear from people. That's the biggest frustration of being chair, is like being in a moment where you know that there's a problem you're looking at and that you know there are people out there doing this work, but you can't find them.
Exactly. I assume that was when I agreed to run, when the nominating committee asked me, I assumed it had a degree of outreach, a degree of openness, and I assumed that was in the job description, and I've tried to run my office that way.
Yeah.
And I've talked to people, just newbies in the hall and oldies in the hall and emails and Twitter and Facebook, and really trying to respond to those things and try to be very responsive. I think in terms of genres in creative writing, it is true there's not much creative writing presentation here or research, but you know, it's here. And there's a certain sort of chicken or egg thing. We open up our call for papers, and I think a lot of creative writers in our field, particularly since we have some programs that are not deeply entrenched in English departments and some that are sort of separate units, we have a proportional acceptance philosophy, so that if there's 1,000 proposals to next year's 4Cs, and 5% of those come from creative writers, that when we make the cut, the 50% or 30% who make it, 5% of those will be creative writers. So I don't know how. Now we have an interesting category, sort of the creative nonfiction. You know, Kathy Yancey and Doug Hesse do amazing, interesting things at looking at those intersections. That might be a bridge, because I don't think the C's is anti-creative writing at all, but creative writing appears here in proportion to creative writers' interest.
I'll try to say that I don't think it is. I think ultimately it's pro, but I think that what my key point was that the people that have most connection with what's been happening internationally in developing creative writing within a broad writing context or any other context have been people that are presenting here and have been presenting here, and people whose books have been read internationally by those that are advancing research in creative writing. So what I'm really saying is it's already there. You know, you've already got it there. I'm not saying it's underrepresented. I'm saying actually it's really well represented, and that actually you would find people in Europe and indeed in Asia and you know, South Africa, places like that, who would better recognise some of the debates that 4Cs is involved in, rather than say at the AWP, where they'd recognise literary achievement perhaps as a key aim, but they wouldn't recognise some of the other materials that the 4Cs is already doing.
I see what you're saying. Sure. That's another really interesting, we'll come to Chalice in just a second, the whole question of internationalization. Should the scope of the C's be just domestic or international? I think part of looking outward is not just Texas or Florida or the United States. We have an increasingly large number of Latin American and European participants, which is very exciting. But your point about tapping into that is a part that's not there. It may be implied, but it's a great opportunity for our organization. Yeah, Sharma.
So that was a very timely preface that you put to the question that I was going to ask. I was part of a workshop, half-day workshop on Wednesday involving scholars of writing in English and communication from around the world. I have a quick question or maybe a suggestion about engagement of the international community, who are very, very interested in the work that we do here in the United States. And also there is an opportunity for us to learn from them. So the theme of the workshop was that not us talking on our terms to them, but them talking on their terms to us, so that we get to learn how writing, reading, communication is done in different cultures and contexts and countries. But there are three challenges. One was they wanted to the registration to be waived, because in my home country in Nepal, $190 is 2 months of salary. And I don't think we should ask them to pay just for contributing a workshop. They are not able to fully participate in the rest of the conference. Second was the internet connection that was completely insufficient, so the people that eventually decided that remained, that stuck with us, weren't able to talk very well. It was a struggle. And third, I think we kind of need to sort of promote, as you are suggesting now, strategically from a perspective of policy and opportunity and conversation, that the third one may be happening, but I would urge the leadership to recognize that and promote that and put that into practice, for example, by waiving the registration and providing a better connection, that kind of thing. A lot is happening, and I think I just wanted to highlight, and thank you for bringing that up.
Hi, my question has to do with the vision of providing conditions under which all faculty can deliver their best practices. I'm wondering about the state of our relationships with the Modern Language Organization, MLA, and whether or not the C sees them as a viable ally around the vision of a one faculty model for integrating non-tenure track faculty and tenured tenure track faculty into maybe a reconstituted singular culture where everyone is doing their best practice, mindful, respectful, and enabling of one another. I'm most anxious about the obviously 76%, 24% ratio, tenure track to non-tenure track, and how that can, in my view, perpetuate class struggle and competing dynamics between those two subsets of faculty. So my question is, how are we doing with our advocacy and alliance building with the Modern Language Association? If it is the case that the majority of faculty who are chairing our programs and departments come from the literature stream yet, are we talking together? I know we have position statements issued by both bodies. Are the position statements simply flat statements that exist collaterally? And are we engaged? Are we deliberating and coming up with maybe combined strategies for merging these two cultures and bringing folks together? So that
We collaborate fully with the MLA in many kinds of ways. If you didn't notice, Rosemary Fial's was here at the Four Cs, going to conferences, soliciting papers for various publications, and if you're an MLA member, and I encourage you to become one, because when you see the election ballot this year, what you'll see is 3 Comp-Ret scholars running for second president of the MLA, which means that in 2 years there will be a Ret Comp president of the MLA. And so I think in the past 5 years especially, there's been a lot of inter-organizational cooperation and data sharing. Yeah.
If I can build on what Malea just said too. So David Lawrence also comes to Four Cs every year.
Yeah.
And both Four Cs and NCTE collaborate with MLA, but also with a range of other disciplinary organizations, especially through the National Center for Literacy Education. So NCTE is a founding partner of NCLE, which is a group of, I believe, 27 different disciplinary organizations. And so they're really looking, and remember, Four Cs is a constituent organization of NCTE, so we have, of course, alliances since we're all together with them. So we're all working together on these issues. Four Cs also has taken very recently some work to study some issues. We authorized a resolution this morning to look at issues associated with labor, and we're really committed to working on those issues of labor and labor practices. So again, both ourselves as an organization, but working in alliance with our other companion disciplinary organizations.
Okay, thanks.
Here's one.
Hello, can you hear me? This is Iris Ruiz. I'm from UC Merced. And I'm sorry that Adam Banks isn't here because I actually wanted to comment on something that he had said in his opening address, and which was pretty controversial, but I think probably needed to be said. And that was the issue of basically scholarship within our field and our discipline, and kind of how it is representative of what Richard Delgado would term imperial scholarship. And I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but basically he's a critical race theorist, and he did research of journals that are associated with legal theory and how in a 20-year period, scholars of color are very minimally cited in those works cited pages. And it's something that Adam Banks had noted, and that a lot of us scholars of color, within Four Cs notice as well. So there's a couple of studies that have been done. One of the panels that was presented yesterday by Dr. Ursula Orr did a study of 3 different journals, CCC, JAC, and Comp Studies, from 1995 to, I believe, 2005. And apparently from her study, any issues that dealt with, race, white studies, white privilege, interestingly only came out in special editions, or special special editions. And so I'm just interested because obviously, you know, our organization want to keep people of color coming and keep them interested, and we have so much to contribute to all of the research and discussions overall and how it represents, you know, our broader populations within our country, not just internationally, but within our country. It's really important that we realize that, you know, we're teaching students that have been wounded in a lot of ways, and some of those ways are, you know, are through our educational institutions, and not only that, it continues, you know, as a faculty member and as scholars, it continues the feelings of, you know, woundedness and not seeing your work that you work just as hard as anybody else on referred to, you know, in works cited pages. So I'm really interested in how next year's 4Cs, which is, you know, about taking action, how it will address, you know, wanting to keep or encouraging scholars of color to continue to want to be part of 4Cs overall and not be discouraged by, you know, low attendance at panels, or not be discouraged by not being cited within works cited pages. And what might be a strategy, because I know this year there was a strategy to include, you know, people of color from the caucus by having the keywords that I had heard didn't work out very well, but how that might work, or what is a different strategy to bring, you know, our visibility a little bit higher to encourage people to attend that, you know, those workshops they might not necessarily attend. I know that's a lot, but I had a lot of things on my mind, and it has been a really great conference, so thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Do you want to take that, and then you?
Sure. And maybe you can talk about the keywords too.
Oh,
So next year's conference theme, Writing Strategies for Action. I won't go through. Talk to me if you want to hear more about the taking action sessions. I've talked about them a lot, and I don't want to repeat that. But next year's conference is going to be very much about capacity building. So just as just as we've all said here, 4Cs is all of us, and it's about all of us working together to create the organization that we want to see. And next year's 4Cs is going to be about helping people develop the strategies to do that. So as a conference chair and as a human being, I believe my best role is to try to create the resources for folks to do the things that are important for them. And we can call that my agenda, that's fine. So that's my agenda. So my agenda is to help you do the best job you can do. So that's really, really what we're going to be about. We'll have we aren't going to have featured sessions, but we'll have special session, sort of identification markers for taking action sessions. So if there are things that, you know, an idea you have about how to take action on that, we'll put a taking action little icon next to it and say, if you want to learn more about this, go to this session. And you'll hear about how, you know, Iris Ruiz has done work on this to improve this thing that is a major issue of concern to her and to all of us. Because the best way that we can work on the issues of concern to us are to develop the strategies to address them. And so that's very much about what next year's 4Cs is going to be about. Since we all have, I mean, huge issues and concerns. So we really want to create a space for all of us to work on that. And I think collectively, as an organization, we're very, very attentive to the issues that we all face, which are considerable, and we want to figure out how to address them. I mean, of course, you know, 4Cs as an organization also has a number of initiatives that address bringing in scholars of color and trying to cultivate the work by folks from all over the disciplines, like Scholars for the Dream, you know, like the Stonewall Awards, the Anzaldúa Awards. Those are all really, really important initiatives, and I think we're all incredibly committed to that. The Marseco Travel Awards, you know, bringing in international folks. We need to make this be a space where we can create the visibility we want to see and cultivate the capacity and the affordances for people to take the actions that they want to take to build that vision from the inside rather than from the outside, if that makes sense.
So one of the sort of histories that I didn't tell when I sort of narrated the timeline of how this vision statement got written is actually that as we were talking about that in that November EC retreat where we're like, I'm asking people to have big, hairy, audacious goals, right? This is actually a formal term in a book on, you know, strategizing and governance and management. Big, hairy, audacious goal. Now think about that. But one of the backdrops to that was a continuing set of initiatives within the EC and the officers group to ask the EC to work on how to increase diversity in the organization and how to increase participation in the organization. And so these initiatives ran side by side for several years under various guises, right? And so when we wrote this statement, I was pretty determined that the necessity of those two initiatives remain as a goal in the statement. And so I think, you know, Iris, speaking as a past chair, not speaking as a voice for the 4Cs right now, I think we have a problem. We don't have enough places for people to publish in our field. A lot of our journals in Compret are owned by editors, lifetime owned, and so they're randomly supported by institutions. So we have a problem with like spaces for people to publish. Now they've been increasing in the last 5 to 8 years because of online journals, because of startups. But you're right, and I think as a new scholar coming in, it's really confusing to think about where do I place my work in RecComp? You know, 3Cs and CE have such high, you know, turndown rates. Where else can I publish? And I think that, you know, one of the things that the organization could do is make all of those venues more visible, whether they're owned by 4Cs and CTE or by other, you know, constituent groups. I think we just don't have any place where you can go online that is, and say, here's the list of journals that, you know, are either Compret focused or Compret friendly, to create that sense of capaciousness for people who are trying to place their work, right? I mean, it's incredibly frustrating. The entire membership of the 4Cs can't possibly publish in the 2 journals that we have. I mean, that's silly, right? But we sort of like backdoor it and underground it and all that kind of thing. And I think that that's one of those like little strategic steps that is easy for an EC to do, it's easy for a chair to do, to move us towards these visions.
We've got about 5 more minutes. Other thoughts? Sure, Sharma. Use the mic.
I really want to, I was really excited by the fact that the 4C's leadership this year and last year, increasingly we are engaging by using all of the tools available at our disposal, instead of thinking, oh, these Twitter people, or those, oh, Facebook people. Twitter and Facebook are servants, they're not our masters. And we don't need to think that a group of people that are tech savvy are the only people who will be there. So I really want to say thank you to Joyce Carter for being one of those inspiring members who is not only inspiring face-to-face, but also inspiring, visible, impactful online and through all the channels that we have at our disposal. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Let me just tweet that before I answer. Before I answer.
I will retweet it.
Well, no, I think as communicators, it goes back to Tom's question. You can be insulated and pat yourself on the back, and it goes to your question about citations as well, and say, we'll just use the available tools and we'll just stay insular. Mm-hmm. But I think that we say, look, we go where the writing's taking place. We go with the tools. If they're print journals at university presses, and that's all there is, that's where we go. There's so much opportunity now. Now, there may be gates up, but there's more opportunity. So if people are discussing in real time in Twitter or Yik Yak or Vine, that's where we should be doing our work. We should be doing our pedagogy there. We should be doing our scholarship there and our outreach there. So, yeah, I don't think it's an add-on at all, Sharma. I think you're exactly right. I think the 4Cs is a multimodal, year-round activity that you can see through whatever lens you want. Yes, you can sit and read a paper at a conference, but it's so much more than that. It is people, it's the Twitter layer and the Facebook layer and application developers layer and game playing layer and serious scholar layer and fun teacher layer and all of that. It's a very multifaceted organization. And so no, I can't imagine running a conference and hosting a conference without simultaneously not just taking care of your water and your electricity needs, but making sure that the Twitter, it's not even back channel. We used to call it back channel. Yeah. I think of it as alternate channel. It is, we are simultaneously operating at a physical level, a mental level. We're all thinking about things, which is in our own heads. We're also tweeting to each other, and that's being cycled out around the globe and around each other and getting retweeted. And I think that is not ancillary. I think that is central, because what we do is an idea that has an instantiation in a ballroom and in Twitter.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I think that you're exactly right. It is not an ancillary activity at all. It is.
And lest you worry, the introductory video for 4Cs 2016 is done.
Yeah.
I just haven't uploaded it yet.
Wow.
Well, and I mean, I think that this is actually a really good example of how the strategic planning process works. I know, I keep coming back to the vision statement. Y'all didn't know I was like this, did you? Because if you can go all the way back to Marilyn Valentino's work as program chair to see the 4Cs start to try to find ways to engage outside of the walls of the convention center. So Marilyn did that. We, Rochelle Rodrigo did a tweet capture of my chair's address. We have all of that data. Like Chris Anson did QR codes. Like, we've tried things that didn't work in order to get to places where we could try things that do work, right? And I think Joyce has done an amazing job of like just pushing us forward, right? And so, but I think that that's the thing to know as members about the governance structure, is sometimes we try stuff and it just doesn't work, but we learn from it and we move to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, and then everybody understands the necessity of rebuilding capacity to push us forward. And I think that it's a pleasure to have spent so much time with so many smart people who can stand there at that right moment where the capacity and the desire meet and go, yes, let's go. Like her.
Right, well, thank you. You're up. Thank you for coming, everybody. I guess that wraps up 4Cs 2015. It's only 12 and a half months until 4Cs 2016.
Be there.
Get your proposals in on time.